Today, we are going to break down a really intense debate that gets right to the heart of a huge divide in our world. We've got two thinkers representing two completely opposite ways of seeing things. On one side, European idealism, and on the other, Asian realism. So let's just jump right in with the one question that basically lit the fuse for this entire debate. You have this veteran Singaporean diplomat, Kishore Mahbubani, and he throws this question at a European scholar about the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And you can tell this wasn't just a simple question. It was a direct challenge to an entire way of thinking. Yeah, so this whole exchange from back in September 2023, it wasn't just some friendly chat. It was a full-on, head-on collision between two massive philosophies that are really shaping how global politics works today. So let's break them down. Think of it like looking at the world through two completely different pairs of glasses. On one side, you've got European idealism. That's all about morals, principles, what's right and what's wrong, a very black and white view. But on the other side, you've got Asian realism, which is way more pragmatic. It's all about national interests and, frankly, who has the power. All right, so the first big flashpoint in this whole debate, it was all about China. And man, this is where you can really see those two worldviews just pull apart almost immediately. The European scholar, he starts by laying out this case that China is in some serious trouble. He points to their new obsession with security over economic growth, the absolute mess left by the zero-COVID policy, this huge real estate bubble that's bursting, and even the fact that the government seems to be hiding how many young people are actually out of a job. The core of his argument is that the basic deal in China, we give you prosperity, you give us political control. Well, that deal is starting to fall apart. Well, Mahbubani wasn't having any of it. He fires right back, and his advice is never trust the Anglo-Saxon media on China. You know, the big outlets in the US and the UK. He's basically saying, look, these guys have been wrongly predicting China's collapse for 20 years now. And then he comes back with his own set of facts. Point one for Mahbubani is all about the data. In 2022, China actually blew past Japan to become the #1 exporter of cars in the entire world. His question is, does that really sound like an economy that's about to crash and burn? Next up, he points to the money. We're talking $3 trillion in foreign reserves. That is an enormous financial cushion. It's like a giant shock absorber that gives them massive resources to deal with their internal problems, like that real estate crisis. And finally, he brings up brainpower. China has now officially surpassed the United States in producing the most top-tier, peer-reviewed scientific papers. And that's a huge indicator of where future innovation and growth are going to come from. So here's the bottom line from the Asian realist perspective. It's not that China doesn't have massive problems. Of course it does. But the key is that it also has the resources and a track record of figuring things out. And this really matters, because while the West is debating collapse, China's neighbors are pragmatically choosing to integrate with its economy, not run away from it. Okay, so now we're going to pivot to the part of the debate that got really, really heated, the war in Ukraine. This is where the conversation shifted from economics to some pretty explosive accusations of hypocrisy and double standards. From the European stance, things are about as clear-cut as they can be. Russia's invasion is an illegal act of aggression. It's a direct violation of the UN Charter. So from this idealist perspective, it is a black and white issue, and being neutral just isn't a morally acceptable option. But Mahbubani immediately puts that principle to the test. He says, okay, I agree. The invasion of Ukraine was illegal. But then he asks, why wasn't that same principle applied when the US launched its own illegal war in Iraq back in 2003? Where were the European Union sanctions then? The scholar's response? He dismisses this comparison, calling it whataboutism. You know, that's the tactic of trying to deflect criticism by pointing out someone else's faults. He's basically arguing that a mistake made by one country in the past doesn't justify a totally different one being made by another country right now. But you see, this whole clash, whether you call it whataboutism or pointing out double standards, it gets to a much deeper philosophical divide about what geopolitics even is. Mahbubani argues that geopolitics is, in his words, a cruel business. At the end of the day, countries are driven by their own interests, not by some consistent moral code. And he believes that trying to inject all these moral values into this harsh reality, well, that's what leads to trouble and, frankly, to hypocrisy. And to really illustrate this, Mahbubani brings up this killer quote from India's foreign minister, S.J. Shankar. He explains why the rest of the world often sees Europe as pretty self-centered. The quote is, Europeans think that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems are not Europe's problems. You know, just think about the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. From a realist view, Europe just kind of looked away.
And this perspective really helps explain why you see not a single country in Africa or South America and only 3 in all of Asia that have sanctioned Russia over Ukraine. From that realist point of view, it's not because they support the invasion. It's because they're focused on their own massive challenges, things like poverty, development, and just keeping things stable at home.
So, what does this whole clash of ideas actually mean for the future, especially when we all know that the world's center of gravity is undeniably shifting towards Asia?
Mahabani leaves us with a pretty stark warning here. He says, the rise of great powers is just a reality of history. You don't expect them to adjust to you. You have to figure out how you're going to deal with them. And if you don't understand these realities, he says, they will eventually come and slap you right in the face.
And that brings us to the final, absolutely critical question this whole thing leaves us with. In a world that really doesn't revolve around it anymore, can Europe afford to cling to its principle-based, moral high ground, or, as Mahabani suggests, does it need to start learning the tough lessons of realism to survive and thrive in this completely new era?